All right, friends. So we are about 52 episodes into podcast growth tools and almost a year into launching it. And I have something very special for you today because I realized I don't really have one go-to space or episode where I share my story and my journey just to help you really get a sense of my experience, but also what's most important to me as a coach, as a mentor, as somebody that you look to for podcast marketing strategies and growth and all the things. And also just to share a little bit of my personal side and what life looks like way over here. So that's what I'm doing today. And it's funny when I sat down I usually at least do bullet points for my episodes. And I sat down and I was like, okay, my story, this should be easy, right? Oh my goodness. As I started writing out my bullets, I'm like, oh, this feels hard. Like doesn't seem very interesting, but hopefully there's little peaks and things in there that feel exciting and supportive to you. And I'm just really excited to share my journey. It's been a beautiful journey. I feel so grateful for every step of the way, starting, the first, as I'll start to share is about 10 years ago, I started my first podcast, knowing nothing about it, not knowing how to do anything. Like I can't even remember the platform we were on now that I think of it. I don't even know that it's out anymore. So let's dive into it. I hope you get a few nuggets that just feel really good to you and supportive to you. And I think at the end of this episode, it won't be very long. I'm just going to banter, to be honest. So I don't really have a script I'm following. So what I hope you walk away with is some new thoughts around the intention of your podcast and why you have it and why you're doing it, and to move away from just this idea of I have to get more downloads and this obsession with it. Because trust me, I've been there. I'm going to share that with you. And I really want you to figure out and hear what I feel is most important. And I hope you start to adopt that as well. So let's dive in. So as I kind of shared, about 10 years ago, I started my very first podcast. It was called Love Rising. It was with my friend, Clara Wisner, and she was a fellow health coach. And we had no idea what we were doing. And I just thought, I listened to, at the time, Coconuts and Kettlebells. I don't know. I think they changed the name now, but, that was two women that I listened to, and I thought, oh, we could do this. This sounds fun. So we like to banter. We like to, we're coaches. We can talk all day long about the things we're passionate about. So we started our show. It was, I remember how we named it. We were sitting there trying to really embody what we focus on. And Claire and I were holistic health coaches. So we thought about the mind, body, spirit, right? All of the things. And the sun was rising. And I thought, we talk a lot about just love being the ever present thing. And the sun was rising as I was looking outside, and I thought, oh, what about Love Rising? And so there it was. I am pretty sure it's still up. If you want to go and find those episodes, my goodness, I don't recommend you do, but hey, so we just started to record. We had fun. I bet we got, I don't know, maybe 20 to 30 episodes in, and life got busy. And so we just put a pause on it. So fast forward, I actually, having that experience and just knowing who Amy Porterfield was as a health coach, I followed some of her guidance as somebody who was trying to build a health coaching business. I think I had just gotten married, and I was like, I was personal training at the time, and I was kind of sick of driving because I had a long commute. And I went onto her website and saw that she had this role for content coordinator. And not only do I come from a journalism background, but I had this little bit of podcasting experience. And in that role description was about writing her podcast episodes. And so I had a lot of content experience, a lot of writing experience. And then of course the podcast in there, I thought, well, I'm the perfect candidate. So of course I apply, end up getting the role, and get to spend over 5 beautiful years on the Amy Porterfield team, which was just like a masterclass in itself. And so, fast forward, I had been writing her podcast scripts among other kind of, content pieces in the business. And I was never the podcast producer or necessarily like the podcast manager, but obviously I had a big hand and a big role in it. And so after we sifted through a couple podcast managers that just didn't work out great, I rose my hand and proposed to Amy and my superior for them to let me fully take over the podcast. And it was like, I think I know what I'm doing. I have a lot of passion about it. I mean, the whole journey with Amy and the Online Marketing Made Easy podcast was where I really fell in love with the podcast medium and the power of it. And just like how beautiful it is to be able to cultivate a relationship with people who maybe you don't necessarily know, but you can coach them or teach them or just make them feel less alone. And we can have these really beautiful conversations. So I would say that's really, what sparked my love for podcasting and the podcasting industry. So Amy and Jaws was my manager at the time. And, they said, all right, yes, you can take over the podcast. You can manage it, all the things. And so it was also around this time that I went to my first podcast movement. It was in Nashville, which was great because Amy was living there at the time. I think it was like 2021. And it allowed me to start to craft this new vision for the podcast. And I sat down and I thought, okay, up until this point, we had actually been seeing kind of like stagnation or maybe even a decline in our podcast numbers, right? Our downloads. And I was so passionate to, obviously it was like my KPIs. I wanted it to grow, not only for that, but just because I loved it and I was so passionate about it. And I knew we had this amazing show, right? So I wanted it to get in front of ideal listeners. And so I sat down after, actually it was at podcast movement in Nashville. It was in my hotel room. And I put together this 6-phase plan to grow the show. And so when I got home, I presented it to Amy and Jaws and we were like, well, what do we have to lose? Let's just go for it. And so it's funny because right after I took over the podcast, I think it was like October that I moved into the role. While as most people know, November and December can be tough months when it comes to, especially when you're tracking only downloads, right? And you see a decline in your podcast audience because people are busy, they're preoccupied, right? Other things on their mind, not necessarily like leaning into just like, especially with business, it's like, yeah, you might be planning for the new year, but you're not necessarily like, what are the strategies I need to do right now and implement right now? So anyways, that's when I took over the show. And of course it was like, those months weren't great. And I was like, okay. All right. Starting in November, we need to turn this thing around. And if I can be really honest, it was so stressful, like seeing the downloads decline, especially after this was like my KPI and I just stepped into this role and we're talking 2021, 2022. And that all we did was track downloads. We didn't track anything else. That was it. That's the only piece of conversation that we talked about was just like downloads month after month, week after week, episode after episode. And I remember obsessively checking downloads every single morning. Now, if you know anything about me or you've listened to my show, you know that my family, we live on the road full time and we travel around a lot. At this time, my husband and I were doing winters only down south and we lived out of a Sprinter van, kind of like, the ones that were really popular in 2021, which by the way, we bought ours in 2020 or 2018. We were ahead of the curve. But anyways, every morning I would need reception to check the downloads, like first thing, and I was in Mountain Standard Time and some of the team was over in Eastern Time. So I was like, it'd be like, 6 a.m. and I'd be like, okay, this was before Starlink too. Okay, we got to get back into reception because I need to check the downloads. I need to see where they are before anyone else logs in. And it just like, it was eating at me. And my husband was like, this is not healthy. Like there's gotta be a different way because when you are focused solely on downloads, it's so volatile. And, back then we had huge download numbers before, but I'll get to like when the iOS happened, right? That's part of the story too. But I remember that. I remember being so stressed out that being like, I'd wake up my husband. Okay, we got to go. Let's, pack up the van. Let's go. We got to get into reception because we didn't have Starlink and all the things. But here's one thing I'll just pause and say is that I'm so like, I had no idea at the time, but this would be eventually a huge driver for me for starting my business and really hoping to guide podcasters away from the obsession with downloads, which there's a place for it. Yeah, we can use it as one piece of the puzzle, but it's for me and for most podcast experts, it is like a small piece of the puzzle, right? What we should be focusing on instead is what is the impact of my podcast, and how can I track the impact that my podcast is making in more of a linear way? How can I really understand the podcast impact that's happening here? And a podcast download will not tell you that. So anyways, we'll get to that all. Going back to it. So we kicked off the 6-phase plan that I put together. And the first biggest thing was treating the podcast like a product. Now, this is still something I emphasize, I cannot stress enough, is you must treat your podcast like a product within your business. So in regards to Amy's business, before we really implemented this, the podcast was kind of just like siloed. It was on its own. It wasn't really like, yeah, obviously we put a lot of effort into it, but we never treated it like a product. And what I mean by treating it like a product is it needs its own promo week. It needs its own KPIs beyond just downloads. It needs its own attention. It needs its own seat at the table when we're planning for promos, when we're planning for anything. This needs to be really a center of our marketing. So that's what we did, right? And a big piece of that and the kickoff was creating a podcast-centric quiz. We launched that in January of 2023, I believe, along with a podcast promo week. And so just like any other product in the business, right? We had a promo week. We had a lead gen for the quiz. And this was, when we did this was in January. It was the first month we hit over 1 million downloads. And we went from like hitting, okay, again, these are 2021, 2022 numbers, 2023. We went from hitting about 400,000 downloads, I'd say 300 to like 500,000 downloads a month to over 1 million. And that was huge, right? That was absolutely huge. From there, we continued to see fairly consistent growth. We had some months where we'd hit way over 1 million and we'd have some that we hit below, but we were pretty consistently hitting decent numbers. And then of course, late 2023, that is when we saw the iOS update along with a few other things that really revealed the real data behind downloads and shattered essentially the golden age of podcasting, right? Like it totally shook us up. To this day. People are still like, what the hell happened? And where did all my downloads go? And it's like, well, they weren't really people. They weren't actually anything to hang your hat on. And so it really gave me, but also hopefully the people who, are forward thinkers, it gave us a new perspective. And instead of obsessing on a number that isn't even giving us the real feedback that we need, what it really did is it forced us to shift to the impact that our show is making. And again, this is still the guiding force and focus for me and my clients today. So fast forward about 8 years with Amy, I decided to step into a role with Kathy Heller as her chief growth officer. And while I didn't oversee necessarily the podcast, I did support her in creating a podcast-centric quiz, very similar to what we did with Amy, that not only helped us to segment people into kind of the nuances of who they were within our audience and give us data and feedback on what is important to them and the content and the topics we should be talking about. But it also drove people to a personalized playlist that really like hooked them in and made them super fans. And that's really the power of it all. And so all of this kind of led to November of 2024. I started to feel this internal pull to go on my own. So not only could I call the shots, but really I wanted to help more podcasters. I felt like I had stumbled upon what a lot of people don't have the time and space to do. And I kind of cracked the code on it. And I wanted to share that with more people. Plus, as a mama, my daughter was 1.5 years and I was just ready for more freedom as an entrepreneur. I was ready to take that next step. So that was about, from the time of recording that was about 1 year ago. And so now I'm, 1 year into running my business. I've supported over 110 podcasters at this point, constantly growing. And, podcasters are seeing real impact with their podcast. They're seeing their audience expand. I mean, we're talking anywhere from 70% audience growth to over 1,000% audience growth. We're seeing revenue grow, email lists grow. Like a marketing system that is fed by the podcast. It is so exciting. It is so amazing. And it really boils down to, what is this podcast doing? What kind of impact is this podcast making? And that's really, really where the really magic, juicy stuff can happen. Because when we focus solely on downloads and we get so frustrated that, oh my goodness, I've only had 1,000 downloads this month, 2,000 downloads, 500 downloads this month. Like, what if those people bought from you a total of 500 times? Or what if those people were in your living room? Or what if you got a message from every single person in your DMs on Instagram saying, thank you, this changed my life? You would be overwhelmed. You would be overwhelmed not only with gratitude, but you would be drowning in messages. Like, sometimes I think we compare our seemingly small audience to what the Amy Porterfields are doing and what the Kathy Hellers are doing. And while I got the opportunity to work with them, that is not every podcaster. And please, please do not dismiss that they have been podcasting since like 2013. I can't remember when Kathy started hers, but I'm pretty sure Amy is like 16, 17 years in. They did not build their show overnight. And here's the tough one. I'm going to get spicy for a second. There's a certain podcaster who comes to mind, and their audience is decent size audience when they launched their podcast. And they have had great numbers. I mean, so quick, such success. And then they went and spoke with podcasters who have been doing it for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and said, oh, our numbers are so low. And I thought, I would love to see those podcasters' numbers within the first 3 months of launching their show. I guarantee they were tiny compared to what we're seeing. So I just want to bring you back to reality that it takes time. Podcasting takes time to build up to something really massive. And if you stick with it and if you're consistent, man, magic can happen. But it doesn't happen overnight with podcasting. It just doesn't. And that's okay, because I think that the long form of it is worth it. Okay, I'm going to step down off my pedestal and get back to all the things. So all this to say, this is definitely my story. It's been such a beautiful journey. I'm so excited that you've been here. I have people reach out to me telling me they've listened to every episode. And I'm like, I just hope there's so many nuggets and supportive things in there for you. And, you know, if there's any capacity that I could support you or you want to come work with me, I would be so honored. And, you know, other than that, I live on the road full time with my daughter, my husband, my 2 fur balls, Charlie and Grizz. And we love to explore outside. We literally camp out on BLM land. Trust me, we keep it much cleaner than we find it always. That's really important to us. And we don't abuse it. And I hope you don't either. If you ever go spend time on BLM land, it's really magical. It's really important. And we're doing it all. And I feel so grateful that I can be literally coming to you outside of Zion right now. Like, Zion National Park is my backyard. And here I am sitting here telling you my story. And it is such an honor that you would even listen to it, that you would get this far into this episode with me. And so here's a few things I want to share with you. My favorite part of growing this business is cultivating relationships with podcasters, real relationships, juicy relationships. It has been something I didn't even realize I was going to get to do and experience. And looking 1 year in, I'm like, wow, I have met some new people who are such a gift to my life. What a blessing. I feel so grateful. And I also want to come back to my mission so that you can carry it as your mission too. I hope more and more podcasters start to focus on the impact that their show is making. How do we create that impact? We make it the cornerstone of our marketing, right? We make it the center of everything that we do with marketing. And when we shift our focus away from downloads and just metrics to really focus on what the impact is, beautiful things happen. All of a sudden we start to create episodes that are speaking to the souls of our listeners, that are feeding into everything that they need, right? It becomes less of going through the motions and more of a passion and more of what the world needs, right? Honesty, realness, rawness. no gatekeeping. Like, let's not gatekeep. That's not what it's about. And so if we can start to focus on the impact and really, really pour into that. And as a podcaster, every time you sit down to record, ask yourself, how is this going to impact my listeners? Again, what if you have 500 downloads a month? But what if every single listener sent you a DM that thanked you for sitting down and recording an episode? Thanked you for sharing your heart and your wisdom. What if? That's the real magic, friend. So please don't discount that, because you are not as big as some of these other podcasters that you dream to be as big as. Give it time. It'll evolve into what it's supposed to be. I truly, truly believe that. Okay, so I just want to share a few ways that you can work with me, especially in the new year. So if you're listening to this live, it's end of 2025, December 30th. Cannot even believe it. So here's what's coming up for you in 2026. In January, I am so excited. I'm hosting the very first 4-day podcast glow up party. It is going to be so much fun. There's going to be 2 tiers. You can do like a standard entry for $27, or it'll be a $97 VIP option. So I'm going to be opening the doors for that in a couple weeks. So if you're on my email list, which if you're not, podcastmarketinghub.com/subscribe, head over there, get on my email list. You guys will be the first to know about it. That is going to be amazing. I can't wait. I'm going to help you audit everything that you have happening in your podcast to make sure that it's set up to be the cornerstone of your marketing. Okay. Everything I talked about today, right? The second thing, I'm going to open up the doors for the second time to my podcast marketing academy. I did a beta round of this in August of 2025. It was amazing. I'm actually shaking it up a little bit, just making it even better than that first round. And I'm so excited. I'm so excited for this round. So that's going to be, if you're ready to actually we're going to audit your podcast in the glow up, make sure it's set up for your marketing. And then in the podcast marketing academy, I'm going to show you how to make it the cornerstone of your marketing. Besides that, I do have an application only. So this is what's becoming my one-on-one. I did one-on-ones all year in 2025, and I want to be able to create a little bit more of a community than just working with people one-on-one. So if you are a little bit more of an advanced podcaster with a business, with an email list, a website, maybe a little bit of an established social media following, all the things, then I would encourage you to do my application only 16-week VIP accelerator. So that's going to be pretty high touch. It's going to be the most touch that you'll get from me in terms of coaching. And so I will link up to that as well. And again, that'll be application only starting in probably January. But other than that, if you're just here for the free show, I'm so grateful. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on this journey with me as I celebrate wrapping up my very first year of business. I could not have imagined it being this successful, this impactful, and I'm just really grateful. So thanks for being here, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Of course, if you did, go ahead, DM me, jump into my DMs on Instagram. If you know anything about me, I love a good voice message. And so we can go back and forth a little bit. And, of course, if any of the things and the ways to work with me sounded right or aligned with what you want and your goal for the new year, definitely be on my email list. You'll be the first to hear about it. And I'm just so grateful you're here. Thank you. Thank you.